9 laps from the end of the 1968 Indianapolis 500, a British car was leading, and it had no pistons anywhere inside it. The green flag waved after a caution. Joe Leonard opened the throttle and nothing happened. He raised one hand and parked in the first turn while America went past him to victory. Within 12 months, the rulebook had been rewritten, so nothing like it could ever run there again. This is the 1968 Lotus 56, and these are 10 reasons Indianapolis banned the British car it could not beat. Number 10. It was born out of a $6 bearing. To understand the Lotus 56, you have to start a year earlier with a car it never raced against. In 1967, an American businessman named Andy Granatelli turned up at Indianapolis with a machine nobody could quite process. It was painted day-glow red, it had a Pratt & Whitney aircraft turbine mounted down one side of the chassis, and the driver sat down the other side, and it drove all 4 wheels. Officially, it was the STP Paxton Turbo Car. Everybody at the Speedway called it Silent Sam, because instead of the hammering of pistons, it made a soft whistling noise as it went by. Parnelli Jones qualified it 6th, which understated it badly, because the piston cars had all qualified on featherweight setups and light fuel loads, while the Turbine ran a full race setup on aircraft kerosene. Then, Jones LED 171 of the 200 laps and simply drove away from the field. With 3 laps remaining, a transmission bearing worth about $6 gave up. Jones coasted to a halt. Voigt inherited the lead and won his 3rd 500. Granatelli had been trying to win that race for more than 2 decades. A lesser man would have taken the hint. Instead, he picked up the telephone and rang Colin Chapman in England. The logic was sound. Silent Sam had almost won the thing with a chassis that was crude by European standards. Essentially, a box-section spine with an engine bolted to one side of it. Hand that same engine to the man who had already dragged Indianapolis into the modern era, and the result ought to be unbeatable. Number 9. America changed the rules before the car even existed. Here is the part that still makes British motorsport historians grind their teeth. Less than a month after the 1967 race, the United States Auto Club cut the maximum air intake area allowed on a turbine engine from just under 24 square inches to just under 16. A turbine makes its power from the air it can swallow. Restricting the annulus, the ring-shaped opening the engine breathes through, is the direct equivalent of telling a piston engine builder to run half a carburetor. In one stroke, roughly a third of the airflow was legislated away. The convention at Indianapolis had always been 2 years of notice on engine regulations, so that teams who had spent fortunes developing something were not bankrupted overnight. That convention was ignored. Granatelli took the sanctioning body to court over it and lost. So when Chapman and his engineers sat down to design a turbine car for 1968, they were not designing a car to beat the field. They were designing a car to beat the field while carrying a handicap written specifically to stop them. Most designers would have argued. Chapman did something more interesting. He accepted the restriction and went looking for the performance somewhere else entirely. Number 8. Lotus answered with a shape rather than an engine. The Lotus 56 was drawn by Maurice Philippe, the chief designer at Lotus, working under Chapman. What arrived at Indianapolis in May 1968 did not look like a racing car. It looked like something that had fallen off a spacecraft. Every other machine in the paddock was a cigar, a tube with wheels at the corners and a driver stuffed in the middle. The 56 was a wedge, sharp at the nose and rising steadily to the rear, the whole body working as one aerodynamic surface. Wings had not yet appeared on a Formula One car when the 56 was drawn, and when they did arrive a few weeks later at Monaco and at Spa, they were bolt-on attachments hung off the bodywork. Lotus had worked out that if you could not add horsepower, you could subtract drag and add downforce and arrive at the same lap time from the other direction. Underneath, an aluminium monocoque, springs and dampers mounted inboard to keep them out of the airflow, and four-wheel drive derived from the Ferguson system that had already proved itself on a British Formula One car back in 1961. All up, it weighed a little over 600 kilograms. The four-wheel drive was not a gimmick. A turbine delivers colossal torque, and putting it through 2 tires at Indianapolis simply melts them. Splitting it across 4 gave the car cornering speeds the piston runners could not touch. American Indianapolis cars of the period were built to a philosophy of strength. Make it stout, make it survive 500 miles of pounding, worry about the aerodynamics afterwards. Chapman had spent his career arguing the exact opposite, that if a component finished the race intact, it had been built too heavy. The 56 was that argument pointed straight at the biggest race in America. Number 7. The engine came straight off an aeroplane. The heart of the 56 was a Pratt & Whitney Canada gas turbine from the PT6 family, the same basic design that went on to become one of the most widely used turboprop engines in aviation history. It burned aircraft kerosene. Even strangled by the new intake rules, it produced somewhere around 500 horsepower and a torque figure that reads like a misprint. What it did not have was almost more remarkable than what it did. There was no clutch, there was no conventional gearbox, just a single speed direct drive through a planetary gear set. A driver climbing into the 56 had no gear lever to worry about and no engine braking to lean on, which sounds simple until you try it. The problem was throttle response. A turbine takes roughly 3 seconds to spool from idle to full power, and 3 seconds is an eternity in a racing car. At Indianapolis, it mattered less than anywhere else because the speeds are constantly high and the throttle rarely closes, which is precisely why the speedway was the right place to try it. And then there was the noise, or the absence of it. Spectators described a hissing whoosh where an engine should have been, followed by the squeal of tires, suddenly the loudest thing about the car. Number 6. Lotus lost 2 drivers before the race even started. The Lotus 56 was built for Jim Clark. He had won the 500 for Chapman in 1965. He was the reigning benchmark against which every driver on Earth was measured, and he was signed to drive the Turbine. On the 7th of April 1968, in a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim in Germany, Clark went off the road and was killed. He never sat in the car. Chapman was destroyed by it. He seriously considered walking away from motor racing altogether. Instead, he brought in Mike Spence, a British driver from Maidenhead, whose early career Chapman himself had helped along, and who was quietly having the best season of his life. Spence took to the speedway immediately. On the 7th of May, he was the fastest man of the month. Late that same afternoon, Chapman asked him to take out a different car to sort out a problem another driver had been struggling with. On his second lap in it, Spence misjudged the entry to turn 1 and hit the concrete wall. The right front wheel folded back into the cockpit and struck him on the helmet. He died in hospital that evening. Within a month, Colin Chapman had lost his greatest driver and the man he had brought in to replace him. He handed the running of the Indianapolis operation over to Granatelli and did not go to the next Grand Prix. Spence was 31 years old. He had run a garage business in Berkshire, overcome polio as a child, and spent most of his Formula 1 career in other people's shadows before finally coming good in the early months of 1968. He is one of the reasons this car deserves to be talked about properly, rather than as trivia about jet engines. Number 5. The team that lined up on race day was assembled in a fortnight. With Clark gone and Spence gone, Lotus needed drivers, and it needed them within days of qualifying. Jackie Stewart was approached and could not take it on because of an injury to his wrist. Mario Andretti was considered and was tangled in contract commitments elsewhere. Time was gone. So the seat originally built for the finest road racing driver in the world went instead to Joe Leonard, an American who had made his name on 2 wheels rather than 4 as a 3-time national motorcycle champion. Alongside him were Art Pollard in the 3rd car and Graham Hill, winner of the 500 in 1966 and the only member of the original plan still standing. If you have been enjoying this one, a like helps more than you would think, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I go through the comments on every video, and the stories you send me end up shaping what gets made next. If there is a British car from this era you think deserves the full treatment, tell me and I will look into it. Number 4. The turbines took the front row and broke a barrier nobody had touched. Whatever the rulebook had done to them, the cars were quick. Graham Hill went out first and put the second Lotus 56 round at a 4-lap average of 171.208 miles per hour. Nobody in the history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway had ever averaged over 170. Later the same afternoon, Joe Leonard did it again, and better. His 4-lap average was 171.559 miles per hour, with a single lap at 171.953. Pole position, a new track record, and a front row that read Lotus Turbine, and then Bobby Unser's Offenhauser-powered Eagle at 169.507. The American establishment had spent a winter writing rules to slow these cars down, and the cars had responded by rewriting the record book. Roger Ward, who had won the race twice, publicly predicted the Lotuses would finish 1, 2, and 3. 250,000 people came through the gates on the 30th of May, expecting to watch a British team humiliate American racing on its own cathedral ground. Number 3. The race was much closer than the legend suggests. Here is where the honest version of this story diverges from the myth. Leonard led away from the green flag. He held it for 7 laps. On the 8th, Bobby Unser drove past him down the main straight in a conventional turbocharged Offenhauser and pulled out a lead of 6 seconds, and the truth of the afternoon was established early. The restricted turbines had wonderful cornering speed and mediocre straight-line speed. They were fast. They were not dominant the way Silent Sam had been. What followed was one of the great Indianapolis races. Unser, Lloyd Ruby and Leonard traded the lead for hour after hour. Unser led 127 of the 200 laps. Ruby led for stretches of his own. After 110 laps, Graham Hill lost a right front wheel entering turn 2 and put the car hard into the wall. He was unhurt. One turbine was gone. Then came the sequence that has been argued about ever since. On his final pit stop, Unser's transmission jammed in top gear. He crawled away from the pit lane, and both Leonard and Ruby swept past him. With 16 laps left, Carl Williams hit the wall and brought out the last caution of the day, bunching the field up behind Leonard. The green came out again on the 191st lap. Leonard applied the throttle and the fuel pump drive shaft in his turbine sheared clean through. Moments later, running 7th, Art Pollard's car suffered exactly the same failure. Both remaining turbines were dead within seconds of each other. Bobby Unser swept past to win, the first Indianapolis victory ever taken by a turbocharged engine. Number 2. The ban came quietly, and it came in 2 parts. Nobody stood up and announced that turbines were outlawed. That is not how it was done. For 1969, the sanctioning body cut the permitted intake annulus again from just under 16 square inches to just under 12. The engine that had already been strangled once was now being asked to breathe through half of what it had started with. There was no realistic way to make that competitive. Then came the second cut. The Rules Committee recommended an outright ban on turbines, and the Board of Directors rejected it, which sounds like a reprieve until you read what the board did instead. From the 1st of January 1970, every car in its championship would be limited to 2 driven wheels. 4-wheel drive was gone, and with it the only practical way of putting a turbine's torque onto the track. The official justification was cost, on the grounds that 4-wheel drive was expensive and had little relevance to road cars. Harry Ferguson Research in England, who supplied the system, responded that describing expense as the reason was so weak it was laughable, and said plainly that cost was a pretext. Granatelli abandoned the turbine project. He returned to the Speedway in 1969 with Mario Andretti and a piston-engined car, and finally won the race that had tormented him for over 20 years. No turbine car has ever qualified for the Indianapolis 500 again. Number 1. They banned the engine, but they could not ban the shape. Chapman took his losses at Indianapolis badly and kept pushing anyway. The 4-wheel drive concept went into the Lotus 63 in Formula One in 1969 and failed. A turbocharged successor called the Lotus 64 was built for the 1969 500 and withdrawn after Andretti destroyed one in practice with a failed wheel hub. The turbine itself got one last outing. Rebuilt as the Lotus 56B, it ran 3 World Championship Grand Prix in 1971. In the wet, it was astonishing, and at a soaking Zandvoort, Dave Walker climbed from 22nd on the grid to the top 10 inside 5 laps before sliding off. In the dry, it was heavy, thirsty, and slow to respond, and Emerson Fittipaldi, who took it to 8th place at Monza, later described it as the worst car he ever drove. And yet, look at the car Lotus built next. The Lotus 72 arrived in 1970 with the same wedge nose, the radiators moved from the front into side pods, the brakes tucked inboard, and a body designed as a single aerodynamic device rather than a tube with attachments. It won 3 Constructors' Championships and 2 Drivers' titles, and it raced at the front of Formula One across 6 seasons. That wedge came directly from the turbine car. So did the aerodynamic thinking behind almost every open-wheel racing car built over the following decade. Within a few years, the American machines lining up on that same grid were wedges too. The The Speedway wrote rules against a turbine and rules against four-driven wheels, and both of those rules worked exactly as intended. What nobody thought to write a rule about was the shape. The Lotus 56 never won a race, never finished one, and lost 2 drivers before it ever took a green flag in anger. It still ended up dictating what racing cars looked like for the next 10 years. America stopped the car. It never did work out how to stop the idea. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one.